Hello, Father Carl. Thank you for joining us and for sharing your life journey with us today.
Thank you.
You have been part of the Secular Franciscan Order for many decades, and you are one of our greatest treasures. We're very grateful for all you have done for us, and we're delighted that you're here to share your journey with us today. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tony. Well, St. Francis entered my life in 1937 when I was baptised Leonard Francis. My mother's Irish father and her brother both had Francis for their second name, Christian name, and my mother affirmed that our patron saint was always St. Francis of Assisi. She was determined about that. And even before I could read, I was very much attracted by a picture of St. Francis in Arthur Mee's Children's Encyclopedia. And the picture is vividly impressed in my memory. Well, St. Francis didn't feature in my life again until after I left school and I was attending the University of Sydney in 1955. And during a break for lunch, I happened to amble past an auditorium, and out of idle curiosity, I read the notice board, and it read, "Lunch Hour Mission conducted by the Franciscan Fathers." And the notice gave the date for 2 days and the time, 12:30. And this was the first day, and I was a little late for 12:30. I went in, still munching my sandwich, and found a Franciscan friar on the stage batting smart questions from undergraduates. I knew about Franciscans, but I didn't know that there were any present in Australia. And I was very impressed by the friar's respectful approach to the students and his competent answers. I went back the next day in good time, and I heard another Franciscan who was just as impressive as the first one. I returned to the laboratory and told my close friend that I had come across 2 Franciscans and how unflappable they were. Russell knew the Franciscans and had recently made a weekend retreat at Warulga. He had to explain what a retreat was, but when I returned home to North Parramatta, I rang the retreat house and asked if I could make a weekend retreat. They booked me in with a parish group. The retreat masters were the 2 Friars Minor priests, Kevin Halpin and John Capistran McRae. They had featured in the lunch hour retreat at the university. I decided there and then that I would join the Franciscans. Home again, I promptly told my parents that I wanted to join the Franciscans. Well, Mum and Dad were eminently sensible people and calmly recommended that I finish my pharmacy studies, and at 21 I could do what I liked. But I was smitten. I couldn't bear waiting for so long. I began a painful conflict with my dear parents. I had asked the friars where to find the Franciscans, and they told me that their main house was in Waverly, where I could see the vocation director if I was interested. So off I went. Father Kieran O'Connell was another sensible person and a tower of strength for 9 months, until I wore my poor parents down and won their permission, their sad permission, to join the Franciscans. I left home in 1956, and that was 2 weeks before my 19th birthday. And I entered the Franciscan novitiate at Merryfields in Campbelltown. At the reception of the habit, I was given the religious name Brother Carl, after St. Charles Borromeo. In those days, the adoption of a patron saint's name was normal enough. It meant a radical conversion from secular life, but after the Second Vatican Council, one's baptismal Christian name was considered to be very important unless one had a valid reason to change it. I found peace in the novitiate. I also found a pamphlet about the Third Order of St. Francis called Hidden Power, which I posted to home. My mother took it up and soon joined the Third Order fraternity at Concord. Now, Concord was not easy to reach from Borkham Hills, but my mother took a bus and a train and a bus there and back for many years. The tertiaries imitated the religious and took a patron saint's name. My mother became Teresa Francis, sharing the patron saint of her father, her brother, and her son. Years later, when I was the spiritual assistant to the Concord fraternity in 2017, I had the sad duty to close Concord fraternity when it became no longer viable. The year of novitiate was crowned with simple profession and then a transfer to the House of Philosophy at Mornington in Victoria. And then after 3 years and solemn profession, we had 4 years of theology at Box Hill, also in Victoria. And for all those 8 years of formation, the Third Order of St. Francis was mentioned only once. Our student master at Box Hill, Father Christopher Goulding, dedicated half an hour to the subject. A Third Order fraternity held their monthly meetings in our Box Hill Friary, but we students had no contact with them. And after 8 years of formation as Franciscan friars, we had no adequate formal instruction or practical experience to equip us as spiritual directors of the Third Order of St. Francis. I did notice, though, that the spiritual director of the Box Hill fraternity, Father John Vianney Kane, took care over the preparation of their meetings, but he had not thought of involving the students. I was ordained as a Franciscan friar priest in Mary Immaculate Church, Waverly, on the 13th of July 1963. In 1964, I was appointed to Waverly as editor of Sursum Corda, which means lift up your hearts. It's a review, or was a review, for religious. And I was also the editor of the Franciscan newsletter, which was a tabloid of 4 pages, one of which was reserved for the Third Order fraternities. There were 3 local fraternities centred in Waverly. There was the original fraternity of Mary Immaculate, the Christus Rex fraternity for university students and graduates, and the Holy Spirit fraternity that had sprung from the Cursillo movement. That fraternity is the only one that has survived to this day at Waverly. The Third Order in France, spurred by the Second Vatican Council, set out to update Pope Leo XIII's rule of 1883. Some of our Christus Rex tertiaries keenly followed the French leaders, and they were helped immensely by their spiritual director, Father Leonard Gleason, who had studied in Louvain and translated the latest developments hot off the French press. Well, as the editor of the Franciscan newsletter, I followed the development closely, and I published the remarkable results. So I was providentially placed to report the great efforts of the tertiaries to forge a new rule after the Second Vatican Council. I couldn't have distributed the Franciscan newsletter without the invaluable help and dedication of a group of 10 tertiaries of Mary Immaculate fraternity. They were headed by Nancy Tracy. These women and a few men deeply impressed me as a young friar priest. They were Franciscans to the core. They convinced me forever of the value of the Franciscan laity. Every second month, for 7 years, we met in the Third Order library under the church, and we folded and wrapped and glue-sealed hundreds of copies of the Franciscan newsletter and prepared them for posting. So what fabulous people they were. And I was sorry to leave them in 1971 when I went to Manila in the Philippines for 9 months of sabbatical studies at the East Asian Pastoral Institute. In 1975, I was appointed to St Anthony's Friary in Singapore to lead the friars community who conducted the Church of Our Lady of the Angels. The OFM, Order of Friars Minor, was the only Franciscan First Order present in Singapore. I shared Brother George's keenness to attract Chinese and Indian boys to join the friars. The Australian province couldn't accommodate them at that time. So, to maintain their interest, I set about forming a local fraternity of the Third Order of St Francis in the friary. Some adults joined the group, which grew into the Fraternity of St. Elizabeth of Hungary, which I was privileged to establish in 1977. The friars were in close contact with the local Franciscan Missionaries of Mary and the Franciscan Missionaries of the Divine Motherhood. The sisters were also keen to attract vocations. So I encouraged them to take on the spiritual direction of local Franciscan groups in Holland Road and at Mount Alvernia. But I left my beloved Singapore at the end of 1977 to take up a new appointment in New Zealand. There were already some established OFM, local fraternity, Franciscan Third Order fraternities in Auckland, Palmerston North, Christchurch and Dunedin. The Capuchins directed 2 local fraternities, Henderson and Wellington. I was appointed to St Francis Retreat House in Auckland to conduct weekend retreats for parish groups and as spiritual director of the local Third Order fraternity. And to catch the wave of renewal, I wrote a newsletter that I called The Lay Franciscan and stenciled a copy for each member of the fraternity. And I still receive the latest issue by mail and admire its modern presentation. So finally, after intense study and experiment by the worldwide Third Order of St Francis, and following the adaptations and renovations of Vatican II, Pope Paul VI approved and confirmed the rule of the Secular Franciscan Order on the 24th of June 1978. And the Pope thereby abrogated the Third Order rule of Leo XIII. So it was no longer appropriate for the Franciscan formation of the laity. The Secular Franciscan Order is described in the new rule as an organic union of all Catholic fraternities scattered throughout the world and open to every group of the faithful. And in these fraternities, the brothers and sisters, led by the Spirit, strive to perfect charity in their own secular state. And by their profession, they pledge themselves to live the gospel in the manner of St. Francis by means of this rule approved by the Church. The Secular Franciscan Order is often represented by its acronym SFO, Secular Franciscan Order. It wasn't easy for the friars to be no longer the directors, but to be the assistants of the fraternities, whose members were no longer Franciscan tertiaries, but secular Franciscans. The changes made by the new rule were so bewildering that I set about explaining them in an article from 1883 to 1978 and today it was called, which I've posted on my website. While giving the weekend retreats, I found many people who were looking for more than Sunday Mass to nurture their spiritual life. I invited them to join a Franciscan evening on Sunday after the retreat. And that was their introduction to the Secular Franciscan Order. Many women and men showed interest in the SFO, so that 3 groups sprang up in Auckland and new local fraternities were established. And I must have had plenty of energy as I spiritually assisted all of them. The new rule structured the international order into local, regional, and national fraternities. New Zealand became a regional fraternity of the National Fraternity of Oceania. When the OFM General Assistant to the SFO, the American Father Bennett Fonk, made his pastoral visit to New Zealand in 1979, he was impressed by what I was doing, and he suggested that I accompany him as Vice General Assistant in Rome. I assured him that my OFM province would never agree to that. Unbeknown to me, Father Bennett did ask the Minister Provincial, Father Cormac Nagel, but was soundly refused. Father Bennett visited New Zealand a second time a few years later and repeated his suggestion with no more assurance from me that I would ever be released. Again, without my knowing, Bennett, not lacking chutzpah, asked the Minister Provincial and got a stronger rebuff and was told never again to visit the province. On his return to Rome, Bennett put up his case to the Minister General. In March 1983, I received a letter of obedience from Father John Vaughan requiring my attendance in the General Curia in Rome. I didn't manage to get there until January 1984. Vice General Assistant to the SFO was a creation of Father Bennett's, who spent much time in pastoral visits to the national fraternities. In his frequent absence, I had to maintain the office of the General Assistant. It was a steep learning curve, but I enjoyed the experience and I learned a lot in the process. I worked with Father Bennett in producing the new OFS ritual, and there was also the letter from Rome to the assistants that we prepared in English for the OFM spiritual assistants. And the General Curia staff translated it into 3 other languages. And this publication, which was initiated by Father Leon Bedroun, OFM, the Third Order Commissary in the 1960s, effectively spearheaded the eventual union of the 4 obediential Franciscan Third Orders and their combined efforts to update the rule of Pope Leo XIII. 18 months later, after the General Chapter of 1985, Father John Vaughan appointed me as General Spiritual Assistant to the SFO, replacing Father Bennett, who returned, sadly, to the United States. I joined the Conference of General Assistants with 3 other friars, Capuchin, Conventual, and Third Order Regular. We worked closely with the SFO Minister General, layperson, and the Presidency of the International Council in attendance at national chapters and in combined pastoral and fraternal visitation to the many national fraternities. What were the spiritual assistants required to do with the new Pauline rule? The four Ministers General in their conference set the four general spiritual assistants the task of clarifying their role, and that of all spiritual assistants. We drafted the original statutes for spiritual and pastoral assistants to the Secular Franciscan Order, which were approved by the Conference of Ministers General and were revised successively in 1992 and in 2009. We worked with the Presidency in drafting the new SFO General Constitutions from their very beginning after Vatican II. It took us over 10 years to draft them before they were approved in the year 2000. When the Berlin Wall collapsed on the 9th of November 1989, East Germany, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Bulgaria, Romania, and Lithuania followed suit in November and December. I was enthralled by the newspaper accounts and the TV coverage of the sudden collapse of those communist regimes. Truly, this was miraculous. The Third Order in Eastern Europe immediately revived and presented a daunting task of formation after the ravages of communism. According to Canon 121 of the Church's Code of Canon Law, the local fraternities were still deemed alive if some of their professed members had survived the communist regimes. Of course, many of them had. The Secular Franciscan Order in Lithuania held their 6th Congress in 1992. And their previous Congress had been held in 1938. It was like stepping back 50 years. And I was astonished by the number of friars and poor clares attending. But they were not friars or poor clares. They were Third Order laymen and women in their brown habits. How they were going to cope with the Church after Vatican II left me feeling very sorry for them. So, with the help of Polish Father Zenon Stish and the presidency of the OFS International Council, I organised a seminar in Krakow, Poland, in 1993 for potential leaders of our secular brothers and sisters in the former Soviet Union. They came from Lithuania, Ukraine, Belarus, and St. Petersburg, and even from Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, who travelled for 5 days by train to arrive, and the same to return to their homes. Others from Latvia, Estonia, Moscow, and Siberia couldn't make it, regretfully. I organised another seminar in 1994 for friars and sisters assisting the laity spiritually in the Ukraine, St. Petersburg, and Kazakhstan. Again, others couldn't get there. Well, returning to Rome in 1994, I pioneered koinonia, meaning fellowship, the publication of the Conference of General Assistants in 4 languages, 4 times a year. By 1997, I had spent 12 years, the maximum time that the statutes allowed as the OFM General Assistant to the SFO, and I returned to my province of the Holy Spirit in Australia. I was assigned in 1999 to the community of Merryfields at Campbelltown, New South Wales. The OFM Provincial Minister approved of my being a national spiritual assistant to the National Fraternity of Oceania, which included Australia's 6 regional fraternities, corresponding to the 6 civil states, plus the Regional Fraternity of New Zealand and the SFO local fraternities in Papua New Guinea and Singapore. I gave spiritual assistance also to the Regional Fraternity of New South Wales ACT and to the local Campbelltown fraternity. The OFM, Capuchin and Conventual National Assistants formed a conference of national spiritual assistants. We settled into regular meetings and composed in writing a monthly spiritual message for the OFS National Fraternity in Oceania. A valiant Korean lady, Zavira Lee, joined the local SFO fraternity of West Pymble, New South Wales in 1999. She completed her formation and was professed. She attracted a solid group of women who were also formed and professed in the West Pymble fraternity. And they continued its life after the remaining elderly Australian members had passed away. And I have spiritually assisted the Koreans since they began to meet. And the SFO fraternity now meets in the Korean Catholic Centre, Silverwater, New South Wales. Campbelltown Friary, our friary, was made the novitiate of our OFM province when 4 Singaporean novices joined us in 2003. One novice, Brother Justin Lim, was a whiz in computer technology and taught me how to master my own website. I called it SFO Files to help the SFO spiritual assistants. Our provincial minister very generously allowed me to park my website freely on the website of the OFM province. Its present address is sfo.franciscans.org.au. I'm careful not to tread on the turf of the website of the OFS National Fraternity, but anyone is free to use my website. It has a modest following in Australia, but more viewers overseas, in their hundreds, such as in the United States, Great Britain, France, Germany, and a few in about 30 other countries. The Roman Conference of General Assistants had published in 1992 guidelines for the formation of the friars for understanding and assisting the SFO. And following these guidelines, I gave courses on the Franciscan family to our novices in 2003 and to junior professed friars in 2005, and also to all our students in formation in Singapore in 2006, and later to our postulants in Australia in 2012. Back in 2001, I compiled a handbook for spiritual assistants to update those friars who had been spiritual directors to the Third Order. And also for them, I ran seminars for OFM spiritual assistants in 2002, and for all friar assistants, that's Caboche and conventual included, in Australia in 2003. And also in 2003, I gave a seminar to the friars in Papua New Guinea. I helped Father Marian Glamochak, OFM, of the Croatian Catholic Centre in St John's Park, New South Wales, from 2005 to establish and spiritually assist the Franciscan youth fraternity. Jufra, or Frama in Croatian, don't remain youth for long. Marriages happily ensued among the members of the original fraternity, but almost wiped it out. I gave retreats to the SFO in Brisbane in 2006 and in Adelaide in 2010. In 2007, I ran a weekend workshop to plan a course for the formation of secular Franciscans as local spiritual assistants. 8 participants were selected by the SFO National Executive and their respective regional minister. All were successful in completing the course, but none had the opportunity to act as a spiritual assistant. In 2008, with a come-in centre in Paddington, I organised the 4 days of the Jufra International Gathering and their accommodation in St Francis Parish Church and School during the 10 days of World Youth Day held in Sydney. The OFM General Chapter in 2011 gave notice of the official name of the order. The acronym that refers to the Latin name Ordo Franciscanus Secularis is OFS, and is always to be used regardless of the language. The correct translation of the Latin into English can be nothing else but Secular Franciscan Order. But its English SFO acronym has been dropped since 2011 in favour of the official and universal OFS. My most difficult task undertaken for the secular Franciscans was the preparation begun in 2007 of the statutes of the National Fraternity of the OFS in Australia. They were adopted by the National Council in 2016 and were approved by Tibor Kauser, President of the Order's Juridical Commission, who was present at the OFS National Council of 2018 and represented the presidency of the OFS International Council. After I had served as OFM National Spiritual Assistant for the allowed maximum of 12 years, my Minister Provincial, Father Paul Smith, asked me to announce to the OFS National Chapter of 2016 that I would no longer be their OFM National Spiritual Assistant. The office was left vacant until 2020, when Father Joseph McKay was appointed. In the OFM Directory of Communities of 2021, I was replaced by Father Joseph McKay as Regional Assistant to South Australia, and by Father Thomas Bujakowski as Regional Assistant in Western Australia. Retired in 2021, I happily continue my long association with the Korean fraternity since 1999, and am enjoying my spiritual assistance to the local Campbelltown fraternity since 2018. During the lengthy pandemic lockdown in 2020 and 2021, I found time to write the biography of an Australian boy who was baptised a Christian, raised as a Catholic, and at the age of 18 chose to walk with St. Francis in lifelong synodality. That's the buzzword. In my autobiography, I write about my long accompaniment of the Secular Franciscans at much greater length than in this brief summary.